Good afternoon. And let me preface by saying I'm saying good afternoon because as I record this, it is Sunday afternoon, October 22nd. But as I've joked in past videos, it is literally taking all day long to upload these things. Part of that is due to the fact that the internet here is really slow. We're out in the country. And part of the fact is that these video files are large. I'm not going to give too much grief because they're large files. But it's going to take a long time to upload it, especially if I go to 15, 16 minutes. And tomorrow, Monday, I'm actually working 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. So if I wait until I get home tomorrow afternoon to record a video and to actually try to upload it, it'll never make it on Monday. So I'm recording Monday's episode today. So this is episode number, whatever number this is, and this will be for October 23rd. And we're going to go ahead and continue looking at the Beatitudes, even though I actually haven't written the blog post yet. And just in case you've forgotten, there is a blog that I keep. That's how you can get to it if you want to go look it up. You can read some of the things I've written over the last 7 years, including the blog post that inspired these series of videos. And you're actually getting a sneak preview because this post has not been written yet. But I want to go ahead and jump back into it before I get sidetracked and go somewhere else. So today we're in Matthew chapter 5, verse 6, continuing the Beatitudes. And remember, there's that progression. We started off with blessed are the poor in spirit when they recognize their position before God. When you realize that you're poor in spirit and without God you're nothing, it says the kingdom of heaven is yours. And then that moves on to those who mourn because of their personal sin. Even though we use that passage for other things, it's specifically talking about those who mourn because they recognize where they are and they understand they're poor in spirit. And it says they'll be comforted. And then blessed are the meek or the humble or the gentle, for they will inherit the earth. And we talked about that in that particular video. And that brings us today. And once again, we're going to read it from different translations and different versions. And we're going to begin by reading from the Christian Standard Bible, which has become my default, the one that I prefer to read out of, the one I've started preaching from. And it reads, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled." And if you remember, I said the Christian Standard is an update or a revision of a translation called the Holman Christian Standard, which renders it this way: "Those who hunger and thirst for righteousness are blessed, for they will be filled." And if you notice, originally I said I was going to be consistent with the way I pronounced that word, blessed versus blessed. I'm still not doing that. Eventually I'm going to decide whether it's blessed or blessed. Typically when the passage starts with the word, for some reason I'll go blessed. And if it occurs later, like in that, I'll say they're blessed. Don't know why I do that. But I'm getting ready to do it again because the English Standard Version, it says, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied." And then the New Living Translation, it says, "God blesses those who hunger and thirst for justice, for they will be satisfied." And you notice it takes a slightly different approach there. And there's a reason for that we'll discuss in a moment. I'm going to put the Amplified in there, and I'm also going to put the Amplified Classic Edition because I'm really starting to appreciate those. But the Amplified, remember there's brackets in there. It says blessed, and then in the brackets we have joyful, nourished by God's goodness, are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. And then the brackets for righteousness says those who actively seek right standing with God. And that's kind of a way we understand righteousness in the context of the New Testament. It says, "For they will be," and in brackets, "completely satisfied." And that's the Amplified. The Amplified Classic Edition says, "Blessed and fortunate and happy and spiritually prosperous." It just puts it all out there, and that's actually not in brackets. But the bracket says, "in that state in which the born-again child of God enjoys his favor and salvation." So it really gives a long explanation for what it means to be blessed. Right there in the text, it says, "But blessed and fortunate and happy and spiritually prosperous are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, or uprightness, right standing with God, for they will be completely satisfied." A lot of interpretation goes into that particular version. And then once again, Eugene Peterson's The Message. I've said before, sometimes I think he's right on the money, and sometimes I kind of scratch my head. This is one of the ones where I just kind of scratch my head. I understand what he's doing. But he says, you're blessed when you've worked up a good appetite for God. He's food and drink in the best meal you'll ever eat. And that's one of the ones where, as I said, sometimes I just kind of scratch my head and go, okay. But going back to our base text, the NIV renders it, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled, which is kind of the way that the major ones approach that. The question you have to ask, we've discussed what blessed or blessed means, and all those different versions kind of deal with that. The Amplified especially, joyful, happy, fortunate, spiritually prosperous. So we've kind of dealt with what that means to be blessed or blessed. So we don't want to dwell too much on that, but we have to ask, what does this mean, righteousness? Now, we understand righteousness is something that we don't have on our own. Going back to the very first of the Beatitudes, recognizing the fact that we are spiritually poor. We're spiritually bankrupt. We have no righteousness of our own. It's only through Christ that we have righteousness. We later read throughout the New Testament that it's actually Christ's righteousness which is imputed or given or placed upon us. And then when God looks at us, he doesn't see our sinful mess. He sees Christ's righteousness on us. But keep in mind, this is the beginning of Jesus' earthly ministry. He just is beginning to teach. He hasn't died for our sins and been buried and risen yet. Jesus is still talking and teaching to a predominantly Jewish group who are still very much entrenched into the law. So the things he's saying are still deeply entrenched in the Old Testament teachings and understandings. So when Jesus is using this term of righteousness, even though it can be extended to that righteousness we have through Christ, what exactly is he talking about? The hunger and thirst part, I think we can all understand and see where he's saying, if you're truly hungry and you're truly thirsty, it's something you've got to have. It's nourishment. Without it, you're going to shrivel up and you're going to die. So the idea is that whatever this is, this righteousness that he's talking about is something that we should absolutely crave and absolutely have to have in our lives. I was looking through an old sermon of John Piper's. Actually, it's probably close to 30 years old, where he was going through the Beatitudes. Specifically, he was going through this. And John Piper explains, he says, righteousness, the way we understand it, is this being pure in heart before a God who alone can see the heart. So part of it is an internal thing that only God can see. But later in Matthew chapter 5, Jesus actually tells those who are listening to him that their righteousness should exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, which, remember, are the religious leaders. They're the ones keeping the law, that practice their religion openly and out in public. And he says, when people look at you, they should see a righteousness that far exceeds that of those Pharisees. Because remember, even though they were practicing all these things, they really didn't believe it. Their attitude stuck. And it's interesting that in the Old Testament, there's a lot about righteousness. Mark Moore, I've shared some of his comments in his book, The Chronological Life of Christ. He explains that this righteousness Jesus is talking about, because he compares it to the righteousness of the Pharisees, is our moral behavior. Now, it needs to have right motives behind it, but it's our moral behavior. When you see the word righteousness used in the Old Testament, Mark Moore says that nearly half of the times that word is used in the Old Testament, it's paired with the word justice. Righteousness and justice. And a lot of times it's within the context of a king. It's in the context of the government being righteous and being just and doing the right thing by the people. In 1 Kings 10:9, Solomon is told, he has made you king. God has made you king to maintain justice and righteousness, right behavior. Psalm 89:14 says, righteousness and justice are the foundation of your throne, God's throne. This idea of righteous living, justice. So Jesus is calling the people to kingdom justice. Remember, we're talking about living in the kingdom, being a follower of Christ. And part of that following Christ is because Jesus was righteous and he was just, is we should strive for right behavior, right living, and for justice, social justice. Now, a lot of people have taken the gospel and completely relevate to nothing but social justice, and they remove the moral obligations. And you can't take one without the other. Jesus doesn't want us to oppress the weak and to take advantage of people that can't help themselves. All throughout the Old Testament, the prophets would continually call out public sin in the lives of people. That was one of the things they did. They called out public sin, and then they called out social injustice. They didn't take care of widows. They didn't take care of orphans. They didn't take care of those who had need. And that's an issue that is very, very dear to the heart of God. And if we're followers of Christ, we need to understand that it's an issue that is very dear to the heart of Christ. Once again, we stand up for biblical truth. If the Bible says something is wrong, then we say that it is wrong. And we strive to live that way, and we teach that that is wrong. But we can't sit by and be quiet while society crushes and oppresses those who are helpless and those who are weak. We as Christians have to stand up for them. John Piper puts it like this. He says, our understanding of righteousness from the structure of the Beatitudes is confirmed later throughout the Sermon on the Mount. He says it's about showing mercy. It's about being radically pure in your heart, making peace instead of retaliating. And these are things that we're going to progress to as we go through the Beatitudes. Piper writes, righteousness is showing mercy to other people. And righteousness is being pure in heart before God alone who can see the heart, which I just shared a moment ago. And righteousness is the effort to make peace. And it's something that we should hunger and thirst for. It's something that we should absolutely not be able to live without. And the great thing is, when you go back and read it again, blessed, I'm going to try to be consistent. I'm going to try to hold myself to saying blessed. Blessed, happy, fortunate are those who crave, who absolutely desire righteousness. And by righteousness, we mean good moral behavior and living, and being just, making sure people are taken care of, making sure that injustice is wiped away. There's a lot of talk in our culture, a lot of talk on social media dealing with injustice. And there's people on both sides drawing lines in the sand. We as Christians can never not side with those who are oppressed, those who are weak, those who are being taken advantage of, because Jesus was always on their side. That doesn't mean we abandon moral behavior. That doesn't mean we throw away the truth. That doesn't mean we exchange the true gospel that we're sinners saved by grace through the death of Jesus on the cross for a social justice that just says, well, take care of everybody and that's enough. You have to have both. You have to have a balance because Jesus taught both. And if you hunger and you thirst and you strive for it, it says you'll be filled. You'll be satisfied. Now, we won't truly have that hunger and that thirst taken care of here on this earth, because this earth is still sinful and there's still the consequences of sin to deal with. But one day, the kingdom, even though we are living in the kingdom and we can get glimpses and tastes of it, I'm currently on a modified diet. So there's certain things I am withholding from my diet. And every time I hit a hallmark where I want to get, I'll give myself a treat. And last night was one of those moments where we had this meal here at the revival, and I had reached a hallmark, and I said, I'm going to allow myself a treat. I knew we were going to have these desserts at this meal last night. And I had been thinking about it and waiting about it because I knew I was going to be allowed to have it. And I couldn't wait. All day yesterday long, I was thinking about, oh, I can't wait. I was hungering and thirsting for that because I knew I was going to be allowed to have it. And that's the way we need to seek righteousness and justice and mercy here on this earth. And every now and then we get little tastes of it. When we can stand up and we can help somebody. When we can reach down and pick someone up and help them along. But ultimately it won't be fulfilled until Christ returns, and the kingdom will be fulfilled completely. And he will reign on his throne, and there'll be no more sadness and no more tears and no more hunger and no more pain. But while we're here, we're fortunate, we're blessed when we strive for that. It should define who we are. The things that broke Jesus' heart, the things that motivated Jesus, should break our hearts and motivate us. We should never sit back and watch people in this world starving and hungering and being oppressed and it not affect us. And that'll lead us to the next progression, the next step, which we'll look at the next episode. So, blessed are you if you hunger and you thirst and you cannot go without righteousness. Jesus says if you live your life in that manner, you will be fulfilled. You'll get taste of it here in this life. But ultimately, you will see that hunger and that thirst finally quenched when he returns. May God our Father give you grace and peace. May you truly be blessed today, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Goodbye.